Good morning.
Yes, I am wearing my awesome bear slippers. That is actually relevant and fun, so hey, what the heck. This morning we were supposed to be doing the text out of 1 Samuel 23, 1 through 14. If you're one of the two people here who actually read your bulletins, you've seen that's not what we're doing. And I'll explain to you why. A few months ago, Jeremy had one of those weeks. We've all had one of those weeks, right? Just everything went wrong. I think he got sick in addition to everything else. And he realized too late to assign the passage to anybody else, there was no way he could do justice to the passage he was supposed to be teaching. So he decided to pull out a sermon he'd done years ago. He polished it up a little bit. He preached that. It was, by the way, a great sermon, and I heard several people say that it was exactly what they needed to hear that day. That's just how great God is. That's how God works. After that, Jeremy suggested to the preaching team, we have a 4-person preaching team here at the Vine, that we should each have an ace in the hole sermon, something we'd done before that we felt comfortable with, that was well received, that we could do in an emergency. That might be like Jeremy because we had something happen and we couldn't prepare the text that week, or maybe one of us got sick or there's some sort of emergency last minute. This would be something that we could grab in that kind of circumstance. So, with that as explanation, this last week I had one of those weeks. I was definitely behind in sermon prep. I knew that, but I'd set out. I had a whole day. I'd cleared the day. I was going to spend that day working on the sermon. I don't usually do that much. I try and break it up. But I knew if I just pushed through that day, I could get that sermon done. For reasons I still don't understand, my wife decided that would be the good day to pass a kidney stone. I don't know why. I don't understand. But we support each other's choices, so I went with it. Took her in. We got all that taken care of. By the end of the day, she was fine. She's not sitting up here because she's downstairs with our sort of granddaughter. It's my son's niece, and we have adopted her because we all live on the property. She's downstairs with her, but she's doing just fine. You can pray for her to never have another kidney stone. She said once was enough, and this was the second time, and she's just done with that. Anyway, so at the end of the day, I've lost all the time I had dedicated to it. I'm definitely emotionally drained from doing all that. And I still technically had enough time. If I had to push things around, I could have made enough time to do the text that had been assigned to me. But I could not have done a good job because I didn't have the emotional or the mental energy I needed at that point to really dig into it. So my choices were to do a poor sermon on the text, or we already had a system in place. Jeremy had done it, so it was okay. So I dug up my ace in the hole sermon, cleaned it up a little bit, updated it a bit, and that's what you're going to get today. Now, I've told you, thank you. By the way, I should warn the gentlemen here, if you're with your wife, I was told by a fellow in first service that a bunch of guys got elbowed during the sermon. Okay, so guys, you all know the drill. It's like this, close in, don't leave room behind the chair so she can get her elbow in there. You're welcome. Anyway, I told you all of this because it really is relevant. I realized as I was going through this sermon that my choice to do this one instead of the text that I was assigned was in fact a result of what I'm going to talk to you about today. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is Sabbath. We find the command to keep the Sabbath in Leviticus 23:3. 6 days shall work be done, but on the 7th day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no work. It is a Sabbath to the Lord in all your dwelling places. Now, it's very valid to say we are not under the law. I get that. I'm not being legalistic here. We are no longer under the law. I'm very happy about that because I like bacon wrapped shrimp as much as the other. Could you put bacon in a shrimp? Anyway, it's a good thing not being under the law. However, when God does a top 10 list, and that's really what the 10 Commandments are, right? That's God's top 10 list. When God does something like that, it probably benefits us to seriously consider what he thought should make that list. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about the 4th commandment, which is, of the 10, the one that few Christians actually take seriously. Now, if all that sounds harsh, I apologize. It is not my intent today to admonish you. My goal is to invite you. And what I have said up to this point, and much of what I will say this morning, is really about looking at my past and realizing how I was. Okay, I'm pointing more fingers at me than I am at you. I wish somebody had done this sermon for me when I was 20 or 30 or even 40 years old. I don't know if I would have listened, but I wish somebody would have at least given me the opportunity. So let's pray. Lord, I thank you for the gift of Sabbath that you have given us. I thank you for the amazing things that happen when we live our lives by the rhythms that you have established. And I pray that your truth would come through my words today. In Jesus' name. Now, while the Sabbath is commanded in the law, it actually predates that by quite a bit. It goes all the way back to creation. It started with God in Genesis 2:3. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done. And he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. Now, why would God rest? Does God get tired? That would be a real theological mess to make that claim, so I will not make it. But God chose to stop. The Hebrew word for rest is Shabbath. It means to cease, to stop, to desist from labor, to rest. It's about stopping. It's about taking a break from our work. I think it's about times and seasons. We see God talk about times and seasons a number of times in the Bible. Now, I'm sure God could have kept going. God did not need the break. He could have just gone straight on through. I think the reason that he took that day off was because he wants to set an example for us. God does not want us to go 24/7. The problem is we live in a 24/7, 365 world. Any of you recognize that? Go, go, go. We're generally impressed with people who are too busy, right? If you're too busy, that means you're important. The corollary to that is that if you're not busy, then obviously you aren't important. No one wants to hear from you. You're lazy. Something is wrong with you. I'll give you an example. Let's say someone recommends a doctor to you, and you go to the doctor's office, and you go up to the reception, and you can see his office door is just cracked a little bit, and he's sitting in there with his feet up on the desk. He's got a cup of coffee and a magazine. Now, how do you feel about that? Most of us are thinking, well, if he was really an important, good doctor, he would be too busy to take a break in the middle of the day. We would judge him based on that. And our judgment wouldn't be, oh, he's a wise person who doesn't work too hard. That's not how we think about it. The reality is, most of us have lost the ability to stop. In fact, we don't even know how to slow down anymore. And that's costing us. We sort of know that, but we really don't understand how much it's costing us. I'm going to talk about some of that today. Being too busy shortens our lives. It messes us up mentally. It hurts our marriages, something near and dear to my heart. It impairs our ability to raise our children well. We as a culture are deeply in need of rest. The good news is, this morning, God is calling you to rest. My own path to being a Sabbath keeper is long and twisted. When we lived in Texas a lifetime ago, for 15 years, I owned a landscape and irrigation company. So I was doing long, long hours of physical labor out in the Texas heat, which lasts for 10 and a half months, by the way. And I kind of thought Sabbath was important. So on Sundays, I didn't do physical labor, but I'd do paperwork for the business. I would go to Home Depot to buy things I was going to use on Monday. I once went to Home Depot at 3 a.m. because you could do that. And it's great. If you know what you want, it's good because there's no one else there, but there's no one to help you either. But the fact that I could go to Home Depot at 3 a.m. says something. Austin was a 24-hour town. I could get a steak dinner at 4 in the morning. I could get car parts any time of the day or night. Now, that sounds great, but think about it, what it says. Think about it, what it cost us. I was living in a town that worshiped being busy and doing too much, and I was a product of that culture. I mean, I thought it was better because I didn't do physical labor on Sunday. I was giving a hat tip to doing a Sabbath, but I wasn't really doing what God designed, what God intended. I can trace my thinking and my journey on this to blog posts I wrote over the years. Starting in May of 2011, I wrote Sabbath Rest. And then more than a year later, November 2012, I wrote more on Sabbath Rest. August of 2013, I wrote Sabbath for real this time. Only it wasn't. Part of the problem we realized later was we were trying to take Sabbath on Sunday because that's what you do as a good Christian. You take Sunday off. And for us, that was not a day that we could take off. We had at least a half a day of things we had to do at church. So we really couldn't get a full day's rest on Sunday, but we were still trying to figure out how to make that happen. Once we realized that was the problem, it became a whole lot easier for us to figure it out. Which brings us to March of 2014. That's almost 3 years after the first post. And I said, Sabbath, finally getting it right. And at that point, we actually had got it right. Now, one of the things that pushed me over the edge was the book, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. It's impossible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. And the author of that book, Peter Scazzaro, gives a number of things that the early church considered important, that they did all the time, most of which have fallen out of favor today. And one of those was Sabbath. That was sort of the final straw. Lori and I were already well down the path of realizing this was something we needed to do, and that was just the final push to get us to do it. But again, we couldn't possibly do it on Sunday. So we began to take a Sabbath on Wednesday, and we've done that now for over a decade. Pastor Jeremy used to call me a fourth-day Adventist because I took my Sabbath on Wednesday. Now, I do want to talk to you about what it means to take a Sabbath, but first let me address the fact that I do it on Wednesday, because that's going to be an issue for some people. And I've got a few scriptures here to help me with that. Mark 2:27. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. God did not make us to serve the Sabbath. He made the Sabbath as a gift to us. The Sabbath doesn't need us, but we do need the Sabbath. And then Romans 14:5. One person esteems one day as better than another, while another esteems all days alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. Now, this passage is probably about the feast that God had commanded the Jews to take. And in the early church, most of the Jewish believers felt they had to follow those feasts. They had to keep doing that. Most of the Greek believers didn't feel that way. They didn't feel that was a part of what they needed to do. And there arose some dispute about that, to the point that Paul had to write them about it. And he says everyone should do what they feel is right. They should be convinced in their own mind. He makes it clear that either one is okay, that you honor the days or you see all days the same. So if we apply that, then I don't see why I have to do Sabbath on Sunday. I can do it on Wednesday. Now, of course, the folks down the street at Seventh-day Adventists have an issue with that. And there are other denominations. There are Methodists, there are Baptists, there are a few independent churches that meet on Saturdays because that they feel is the true Sabbath. And I've had, vigorous fellowship with a few people over that issue. It's funny because every time I wrote about this in my blog, I'd get some Seventh-day Adventists. They didn't show up and say, well, you're doing it right, but on the wrong day. All they could see was I was doing it on the wrong day. Somehow the day was more important than actually taking the rest. Now, I'm not going to judge them. I have no desire to judge their choices. I've got Seventh-day Adventist friends. They love the Lord. They're not the same as I am. That's okay. They love God, and I'm fine with that. However, I'm not going to let them tell me I'm doing it wrong. I don't believe what I'm doing is unbiblical. I don't see any biblical reason to force myself to do it on Sunday or on Saturday. To me, this is a matter of grace. And what grace means is I can look at Sabbath, I can understand the benefit that Sabbath has, and then I can figure out how to apply that to my unique life and make it work for me. Doing it well on Wednesday is way better than doing it poorly on Sunday. Now, God created us. God knows us. He knows how we're built. He knows how we function best. He knows the lifestyle that works for us and what doesn't. And we do well when we follow seasons, when we have cycles, right? We have circadian rhythms. Our bodies and our minds have certain things that work by a 24-hour clock or by other times during the seasons. One of those is working 6 days and resting 1 day. Turns out that is really very good for us. The book Emotionally Healthy Spirituality shares a powerful story about this. He references the wagon trains on the Oregon Trail. The Oregon Trail was a little over 2,000 miles, depending on where you ended up. It took somewhere between 4 and 6 months, depending on the group. They would travel in large groups, safety in numbers, to get across the country. You couldn't start too early on the one end, and you couldn't be too late on the other. There were places technically you could stop if you got caught in the winter, but it wasn't a good deal. Any of you ever played the game, the Oregon Trail? Remember that one? You have died of dysentery, right? Over and over and over. Yeah, I see a lot of you have done that. The Oregon Trail wasn't quite that bad. The actual death rate was somewhere between 4 and 10%, depending on the group that you travel with. But still, it was brutal. It was a serious thing to follow. So Peter Scazzaro talks about the Oregon Trail, and he talks about one large group, started out from Missouri City. As they're getting across the country, they had some problems. They weren't making the time they wanted, and it started looking like it was going to be an early winter. Are we going to make it in time? So they had a big meeting, and some of them felt, well, we should stop taking Sabbath, because as good Christians of that time, they took a real Sabbath. They stopped on Saturday night, and they didn't move again until Monday morning. Okay, they did not travel on Sunday. But some of them are saying, God would understand. God doesn't want us to freeze in the wilderness. If we'll, just not do Sabbath until we get to the end, that'll give us the extra time. That'll probably make the difference. Others said, no, God will honor us honoring him. And they could not come to an agreement. So they split into two roughly even groups. The one group went ahead, didn't keep Sabbath. The other kept doing Sabbath. Now, most of you probably know what I'm going to tell you next. The group that kept Sabbath got there first. They traveled less days total, but they got there first. The biggest reason for that was their animals were less likely to die. Their ox, their horse, their donkeys, whatever they were using to pull their carts, that day of rest made a difference. They had a far lower death rate than the ones who went 7 days a week. Also, of course, it helped the people. Women and children tended to spend a fair amount of time in the wagons, so it wasn't as hard on them. Men were on foot pretty much the entire time. They were out ahead, scouting ahead. They were providing protection. Were there natives out there? Were there animals out there? A cart gets stuck, a bunch of guys have to help it get through. So they were working pretty hard, and that day's rest made a difference for them too. It meant that when they went, they could go better. It's a real world example of how following God's rules actually made things much better. And then quite by accident, I stumbled on another example of this. There's a graph up there on the screen, and you've got two groups. The line that dips down, those people were working 60 hours a week. The other ones were working 35 hours a week. And then you've got productivity up the left side. This comes from Daniel Cook. Daniel Cook is a game designer. He's very out of the box, and he thinks we should do what works, not what everybody else does. And this graph comes from 31 studies that he did on work time, flexible schedules, and the effects of stress. And what it shows up here, initially, these people are working the same project, they're doing the same work, just some are working 60 hours, and the other team's working 35. Initially, the 60 hours, their productivity is way better. They're getting more done than people who are working almost half as much. But even by the end of the first week, their productivity is starting to slide. Shortly before 4 weeks, their productivity is down to the level of what the 35-hour group is doing. And it keeps dropping. At the end of 8 weeks, their productivity is horrible compared to the 35-hour group. And if they look back at the entire 8 weeks, the 35-hour group accomplished more during that time than the 60-hour group. So the 60-hour group worked more, was more tired, and accomplished less. That does not sound like a good deal to me. There have been other studies on this. They show that performance maxes at 55 hours in a week. Anything more than that, and productivity drops significantly. They found that at 70 hours, you're not getting any more done than at 55, and in some cases, you're getting less done. Another statistic I've seen more recently, for those of us who are retired or close to that we should not work at a job more than 30 hours a week. We do very well up to 30. After that, we start to suffer. Take that for what it is. Long hours have been shown to increase cardiovascular events and chronic illness. It weakens our immune system, which means we catch everything that comes along. It's associated with burnout, anxiety, and depression, and sleep disturbances. Also hurts our relationships, especially our marriages and our relationships with our children. A few studies have shown that those who take a real rest once a week live longer. Now, the problem with the study is most of the people they studied to determine this were Seventh-day Adventists. Seventh-day Adventists eat a healthier diet than most of us, so that has an effect. But in trying to tease that out, they believe that taking a break, a real break once a week, really does add several years to your life on average. And why wouldn't it? Less heart attacks, less stress, less suicide, of course you're going to live longer. So what this graph tells us is we can push hard for a while and benefit, right? Everything in the green, that was more productivity than those people would have done if they hadn't been working harder. But it has to be short term. We can't do that forever. When that becomes our norm, when we're always going full out, it hurts us, it limits us, and we get less done. So what does it look like to rest? Okay, that probably sounds like a silly question, but in our culture it really isn't. Because I think a lot of us don't really know what it looks like to rest. Limiting physical activity is obviously part of it. The Sabbath certainly looks at that, but I don't think that's the real heart of it. I think our minds need to break more than the body, especially in the modern world. Most of us don't kill ourselves physically. I know we've got contractors here, we've got people who do that. The majority of people now spend much more time behind the desk, and so you really need a mental break. And not just a break, you need to do something different. You need to change it up. You need a chance to recharge. In short, we need to learn how to play. Now, on Wednesdays, Lori and I don't do work. We don't do heavy gardening. We love gardening. We enjoy gardening. If things need watering, I'll water them, but we don't go out and do heavy gardening. We don't work on our post. We don't work on the things that make income from us. We traveled for a while. We spent 9 months in an RV traveling the country, and we determined that we would not move the RV on Wednesdays because setting up and tearing down a fifth wheel is a fair amount of work, and we just decided we don't want that much work. A couple of years later, we spent several months traveling the country in a car, and I decided I will not drive more than 80 miles on a Wednesday. Hour and a half, 2 hours, that's an easy drive. You get much more than that, it starts to be work, and I'm not getting the break I need if I'm doing that. So yeah, we rest. We rest physically, we rest from our job. But what we don't do on Sabbath really isn't what's important. What's important is what we do on Sabbath. And I'll give you some ideas about that. Lori does art. She's a great artist, and she had realized she was so busy she wasn't doing art much anymore. And so sometimes on Wednesday, she'll break out one of those things and just do art. It's amazing. When we used to live in Deer Park here in town, we had a standing date at Classic Cafe. Some of you remember Classic Cafe? No agenda, no time limit. We'd just show up early afternoon, stay until we were done or they kicked us out. It was great. We spend time with friends on Sabbath. When the weather allows, we do what we call blue and green. We live on a mountain outside of Springdale. It is the most gorgeous place. There are plants, there are trees, there are flowers. We've got our garden, we've got the animals. We can look down to my son's place. There's a pool down there. The grandkids are playing in the pool. And it is so restful and healing to sit up there in the shade and just take in God's creation. Sometimes we'll have extended prayer time on a Wednesday. Our small group meets on Tuesday night. Usually when we've been in a small group, it is met on Tuesday night. And that's sort of the start of our Sabbath. When we leave for small group, that is the beginning of our Sabbath. So we're starting the Sabbath with prayer, with studying of God's Word, and with fellowship. We try to eat a meal that we really enjoy on Sabbath. That could be Tex-Mex enchiladas, homemade pizza, or the new one is honey garlic salmon. And Leslie said I should have put the recipe up here. And for those of you who are married, the Jews of old said that Sabbath is a blessing and sex on the Sabbath is a double blessing. So there's that. Now, what you might do on the Sabbath, if you decide to have a Sabbath, is going to depend on who you are and how God made you. There's no hard and fast rules. If you like fishing, that'd be a great Sabbath. You're out on a lake, it's calm, you're in God's creation, you got a friend with you. I'm not a big fisherman, but I know a lot of you are. Jeremy, hello, I know you're out there fishing. That'd be a great way to spend a Sabbath. Or maybe you play games with friends or with family. You do a hobby, you take a nap, especially if you can get a hammock under the trees, that'd be great. Whatever it is you enjoy, reading. The point is you're doing something that you enjoy and that's restful. Now, some people do sports on the Sabbath. If you have a really physical job, I think your body probably needs a break. But if you spend all your time behind a desk, then sure, go out on a hike, go climb a rock, go do some sort of sporting thing. That'd be great because it's giving your brain that difference and that break that it needs. Now, since I originally wrote this, I'm seeing people talking about a tech Sabbath, which means getting away from technology for a day. I have not done that. I probably should try it sometime, but I've seen a lot of studies on it. I've seen people who've done it who said it really makes a difference to them. Now, of course, I make a living online, so I'm on a computer or my phone all the time. But on Sabbath, I don't do any of those things. What I do is I have fun online. But I still think it's a serious thing. In fact, somebody left this morning and said they had decided yesterday they needed a tech Sabbath today, and it was so funny that then I got up first service and talked about this. It's certainly something to consider. So if you're not doing Sabbath already, I mean really Sabbath, the kind of Sabbath that I'm describing here, why should you? For Lori and I, Sabbath has been an amazing blessing, and we cannot imagine going back. As I say, we've been doing this for a decade now, and sometimes, at least once a month, one of us looks at the other and says, how did we survive before Sabbath? And we really feel that way. I would give up a lot to be able to have Sabbath. In fact, I can't imagine a situation where I think it was a good plan to not have Sabbath. Once in a great while, we have bumped Sabbath to Thursday. There were things that were in the way that could not be moved, and so we would do Sabbath on Thursday instead of Wednesday. But that's got to really be a serious situation, and it's only happened a half a dozen times in 10 years. Because part of what works for us about that is we know it's coming. We know when we have Sabbath. It's once a week. And if we start moving it around, then that loses some of that. We've done really well at keeping the Sabbath for more than a decade, but that's not out of obligation. It's not out of fear, right? The Jews of old were legalistic about it. In fact, prior to Jesus, you didn't keep the Sabbath, they'd execute you, right? That's a good reason to keep the Sabbath, because you don't get anything done when they kill you. That's a little legalistic. That's not what we're doing here. That's not why we're doing it. We do it because it helps us. We have seen the blessing that comes from Sabbath. I used to go all the time, and I went hard all the time. I didn't even know that I was tired because I was always tired, right? How can you feel it when it's always there? I didn't see how it was affecting me mentally. I didn't see how it was affecting me emotionally because I lived in it all the time. It's sort of like the fish who doesn't know they're in water because it's always been there. They don't process that the water is there. Sabbath offers me a reset. Sabbath gives me a reference point for what it feels like to be rested, to be relaxed. It helps me to know when I've done too much during the week because I now know the difference between tired and exhausted. I know the difference between stressed and overwhelmed. Okay, I have learned how to feel that. And this is a huge point. Basically, I've learned my limits. And knowing our limits is a good thing. It helps us not hurt ourselves. Right? Those of you who've passed 50, you're starting to find out that as you get older, there are some limits. Okay? And you can do one of two things. You can ignore those limits and hurt yourself. I've done that. Anybody else? Don't raise your hands. Don't embarrass yourself. Or you can acknowledge those limits and live within them, and that's better. You don't hurt yourself. You actually accomplish more because you haven't got a broken leg that keeps you from doing things. Understanding and accepting our limits is not easy, but it's a really good, healthy thing. Sabbath has helped us to do more. Okay, you remember that graph and the 60 hours? If you're running a race and you're tired, I'm not even sure I'm going to make it, and you come over a hill and you see the tape. All I have to do is get through that tape. And what happens? You speed up. You've got this temporary burst of energy because you see the finish line and you know that once you break that tape, you can stop. You can fall down. You're finished. And that's what Sabbath does for us. It gives us that line that we can say, okay, we can push hard for the next day or two to get to Sabbath, and then we know that we can recover and go back at it again. During Sabbath, we relax our minds, and that allows for creativity. Our brain is not so busy processing everything. That's why Lori loves doing art, because she's so much more creative on that day of rest. I often get great ideas for blog posts, which I make a note of and then push away because I'm not doing that on Sabbath. But it's just my mind is free to do that. I don't have all the stuff holding me down that's usually there. And then after Sabbath, we feel so much better about ourselves. We feel better physically, we feel better emotionally, we feel better about our lives. And that allows us to get up and get going again. Sabbath is a lot like a vacation, except you don't get jet lagged and you don't come home tired. Sabbath has been amazing for our marriage. Now, by the time we got around to seriously taking Sabbath, we had dealt with most of the big problems in our marriage. There's still little stuff. There's always little stuff. We'll go to our graves with things that we have to work out. But we'd done the big stuff. But I can see if we had been taking Sabbath and we were still struggling horribly, it would have made such a difference. That day would have been less pressured. That day we could have just, okay, we're not going to worry about things today. We're just going to enjoy each other. We're just going to relax. We're going to enjoy God. That would have been such a healing thing for us. And I know that it would have sped up the healing that we needed to have had that break in our lives. We've also learned, it's been a tough thing and we aren't perfect at it, but we've learned how to set things down on Sabbath. Right? The worries, the concerns, the problems, we just push them away. We can pick them up the next day, or not. We can leave them there if we want to. But it also gives us a chance then to process those things differently. When you're not actively worried about all this stuff, you feel it differently. God can speak to you about it. It gives you a better perspective on that. Now, I said when I was opening that part of why I'm doing this today instead of the Samuel text is because of Sabbath. If that's not obvious to you, then I will give you an understanding of that. In the past, the week we had kidney stone and everything, I would have chosen to push through and do the assigned text. Okay, that's what you do, right? Productivity. There would be some pride involved in that. The other thing that would have been involved in that is I wouldn't have understood what it was going to cost me to do that. Because that's just what I did. I wouldn't have felt it. I might have felt it afterwards when I fell down and Lori had to drag me out to the car, but I wouldn't have seen it ahead of time. I also wouldn't have seen what it would have done to my wife. Because the truth is, busyness and stress don't live in here. They spread out from me. They hurt my wife. When I had kids at home, they hurt my kids. They affect the people around me, and they don't affect them in a good way. In the past, I would have managed a mediocre at best sermon on the Samuel text. I would have made it happen. But I would have cheated you all. You would not have gotten the sermon that you should have on that text. Someone else will pick that up. We'll do it not next week, speaking next week, the week after. You'll get a quality sermon about that text. Let me share another way that Sabbath has affected me, that has taught me how to live better. In 2019, I had a stroke. And it drove doctors crazy because they couldn't figure out why. Didn't have any of the reasons that a person used to have a stroke. I had every test there's known to mankind. I wore a heart monitor for a week. That is not a fun thing, by the way. They finally kind of gave up. About a year later, I was diagnosed with a rare blood disease. There are 80,000 people in the country, so it's not something that anybody thinks about, that can cause strokes. They fixed that. It's all taken care of. I'm good. But after the stroke, I found myself sleeping 10 to 12 hours a night. Now, usually 8 hours is I've been in bed too long. I wake up at 7.5 and I'm done sleeping. Not because I set an alarm and I feel guilty. That's just how I go. Lori says I'm always on. That's pretty close to accurate. So 10 to 12 hours, even 14 sometimes, that's crazy. But because of Sabbath, first of all, I could feel it. I felt that I actually needed that much sleep. And second of all, because I had accepted limits, I was willing to let that happen. For 2 months, I slept 10 to 12 hours a night. And then one night, like God flipped a switch, it stopped. I slept 11 and a half hours one night, 7.5 hours the next night. I was fine in 7.5, and I haven't gone back. But I understand the brain science. I understand my brain was trying to fix itself. And sleep is how it does that. And if I had not done that, because in the past I would have said, okay, I need more sleep. I will set an alarm for 9 hours, and I'll get up at 9 hours because I'm being a lazy bum if I sleep any more than that. Well, that would have hurt my recovery. It would have slowed my recovery. It might have prevented me from getting everything back. The only lingering thing I have is my left foot tingles like it's waking up from being asleep. That's it. That's the only problem I have left from that stroke, and I'll take that. That's nothing. But if I hadn't been good to myself, I would probably have other issues to this day. Sabbath has put me in touch with my body and with my mind. It's taught me that it's okay to have limits. Not just the reality of it, but it's okay. I'm human. This is who I am. I have to accept that. It's much healthier. It's much better for me. Now, I can hear a lot of you thinking, well, that's fine for you, but I've got kids, or I've got a real job, or there's hundreds of reasons, right? And I know that because for years and years and years, I pushed back on the idea of having a Sabbath. And I realized looking back that what I was doing was saying, I have a better plan for my life than God. I mentioned that at the time that the wagon trains were coming across, Sabbath was the norm. Christians took the Sabbath off. There were blue laws and all kinds of other things, and you got in trouble if you didn't, but people just felt like they should do that, even without the pressure from the outside. Today, almost nobody takes Sabbath. So what happened in 175 years that we made that change? The best thing I can find after studying this a fair amount is that busyness won out. We decided that all the things that we had to get done were more important than an outdated idea about rest, even if God was the one who created that outdated idea. Like I said, I was putting myself ahead of God. I was seeing myself as too important to stop. J. Dana Trent, author of For Sabbath's Sake, Embracing Your Need for Rest, Worship, and Community, says, Sabbath is an act of humility that puts God, not me, at the center of my life. Sabbath puts God, not me, at the center of my life. Do I trust God? Do I think that I am so important that the world won't work without me, that God can't get by without me? Or do I trust God? Sabbath is about trusting God. Sabbath is about getting off the throne, right? That's what we're supposed to do as Christians. We're supposed to get off the throne of our own life and let Jesus sit there. Well, Sabbath is doing that in a very real way. Especially when it looks like it's going to cost us something, like those people on the Oregon Trail. They said, no, you are Lord, and we will accept what you say, and we will trust you to take care of us. And Sabbath is a huge statement in that direction. So if you got kids, I know a lot of the people in the service have kids. Does that keep you from taking a Sabbath? No, it does not. I know several families with very small children who take Sabbath and do so very successfully. Now, will starting that process with young kids be difficult? Of course it will, because you got young kids. Everything you do that's new, they're going to fight it in some way. That's just what they do, okay? It's not judgment, that's just what they do. They make everything difficult starting out. But you can still get past that. And imagine what it would do for your children. To teach them as kids to understand rest, to understand play, to know what it feels like to not be exhausted. And to back that up, there are a number of studies out now, and people, this is since the first time I wrote this sermon, talking about the danger to our children of being too busy, of having overscheduled lives. They say that this has increased anxiety, depression, and even suicide among children. And even, there are kids in elementary school killing themselves now, suicide, because they just can't cope with the life that we are pushing on them. My parents understood. We needed time off. People are starting to re-understand that, to learn, yes, kids cannot go all the time. Kids need downtime. They need time when there's nothing scheduled, and let them use their imaginations and figure it out. And yes, they'll say, I'm bored. They'll get over it. Doing Sabbath as a family is an amazing gift to your children, to help them learn what it means to be rested. We, unfortunately, by the time we did this, our son was grown, but he was still in our lives. He still saw us regularly. He understood what we were doing and why we were doing it. And I can see secondhand he has benefited from that. My son does construction. He works really hard, and he will not do heavy work on Sundays. He doesn't go out and do construction, but he also won't do it around his place. He takes a break. He understands that his body physically needs that break, and he does it. I wish he'd seen it firsthand growing up, but he still benefited from it. And a note to dads. Taking Sabbath does not mean that you get to sit on the couch and have a break while your wife takes care of the kids. That's not how this works. Okay, it means that the two of you together teach your children how to rest, how to do things differently. And you share that burden so you can both get some rest. The real obstacles of taking a Sabbath aren't what we generally think they are. Some of you are thinking, well, I can't take a Sabbath because I have to work 2 jobs, or I have to take all the overtime they hand me. The reality is most of us do that because we have too much stuff. I know I'm messing with people here, but we are a consumeristic society. We want more and more. We want the newest, we want the best, we want 2 of them. We buy. We've been trained to do that. And that takes a lot of money. You have the money to buy stuff, you have the money to maintain stuff, you have the money to store stuff. You know what? Storage sheds is a massive industry in this country. They just put a whole bunch over by the railroad tracks. And it's weird. It's almost like a museum, right? You take all your stuff that you bought that you can't spend time with because you're too busy working, and you go put it in this little museum, and twice a year you go visit it. Okay? It makes no sense, but we do it. We do it because that's what we've been taught to do. And if you really want to take Sabbath, you may have to work fewer hours. And working fewer hours may mean you have to give up some of your stuff. Okay? And I'm meddling here big time. I understand that. But when I look back at my life, I understand that was part of what kept me from doing Sabbath. And if I could do it over again, I'd have a lot less stuff, and I'd have started taking Sabbath way earlier. That would be my choice, hands down. And really what I'm doing here is I'm confessing. I'm not accusing anybody here. I'm confessing my past. And if it fits you too, well, okay, let God deal with that. The truth is, you can take a Sabbath if you determine you're going to do it. Right? The Jews of old did it. The more religious Jews today still do it. They take a Sabbath, period. There is no exception. And they manage because that's a choice. It's a priority for them. Now, if you decide to do it, okay, I don't expect anybody to go home and say, yes, we're doing this right now. But if you decide this is something I need to do, well, there's a problem. Because it's taken you years or decades to become as busy as you are. And most of us can't just turn that off tomorrow. It's going to take you months, maybe years, to change your life to the point where you can take a Sabbath. But if you can't start with a full 24-hour Sabbath, my suggestion is that you take a partial Sabbath. Do dinner to bedtime once a week. Lori and I did that on Thursdays for a while as we were trying to get this right. And that'll give you a taste for it. And my guess is if you do that for a couple of months and really do it, you will want more. You'll see, you'll understand. You'll say, this is good, but I need more of that. Now, do be warned, if you decide to take Sabbath, it is countercultural. It's even countercultural within the church. When Lori and I started doing this, I was working for a Christian ministry, and I checked. The board of directors was fine with me taking Wednesday off. That was approved. My direct boss just couldn't get it in his head. He would call me all the time on Sabbath. He'd be like, it's Sabbath, I'll get to it on Thursday. Now, I don't know if he couldn't keep it in his head or if he just didn't want to honor it, or what I think really happened is he was jealous that I was getting a day off and he wasn't. But even within a Christian organization, there were some issues with it. Pastor A.J. Swoboda, author of Subversive Sabbath, I love that title, Subversive Sabbath, The Surprising Power of Rest in a Nonstop World, says this about Sabbath. It is a very threatening biblical concept because it completely undermines all the assumptions of what we had come to believe being an American is all about, which is being productive. Right? That's who we are, Americans. We build things, we make things, we do things. That is our cultural understanding of who we are. And so rest, that is anathema to that whole idea. He's absolutely right. I've had people look at me oddly because I take a Sabbath. I've never had anyone call me lazy to my face, but I'm sure it's been said behind my back. I don't care. I think doing what God has called me to do has really benefited me. And if that means somebody thinks I'm odd, if that means somebody thinks I'm lazy, I can live with that. I'd rather do God's way and be healthy than do the world's way and be dying because I'm too busy. I have seen in the last few years since I wrote this, more and more people talking about Sabbath. Those 2 books I mentioned are fairly recent. They've come out since I originally wrote this sermon. A lot more Christians are starting to talk about this, probably because they're seeing the disasters that are happening because we're not taking Sabbath. I wouldn't call it a movement yet, but I'm hopeful it becomes a movement. And maybe you can be part of that by letting it be something in your life. Sabbath is really only a piece of this. I talked about times and seasons. Sabbath is one of those, but it's only one of many. God gave the Jews all the festivals, the feast. And part of that was about remembering what God had done. That was obviously a part of it. But another part of that was taking a break. It was taking time out. It was a day or even a week dedicated to spending together with family, to being together, to celebrating, to eating good food, and to not working. God also told them that every 7th year the land was to be fallow. They weren't supposed to plant anything. They weren't supposed to tend the vines. There was no farming going on for that entire year. Now, if you think about the people at that time, it was a very, very agrarian culture. Virtually everybody was touching the soil in some way. If you don't do that for a whole year, that's basically a year off. You'd still have activities you had to do, but that year would be significantly less work. It was a forced rest. The truth is we need vacations. We need sabbaticals. That's a dirty word. The world tells us that we don't have time for those things. God seems to feel otherwise. You want to come up? The truth about Sabbath is that it's in God's book. It's not about Him bossing us around. It's about Him caring for us and wanting what's best for us. The Bible is not a list of rules. That's not what God did. God actually wrote a love letter to His bride, to us. And the Sabbath is one of the many gifts and blessings that you can find in that love letter. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you again for your gift, the Sabbath. I thank you for getting through my thick skull and teaching me about this. And I pray that you would speak to others what you would have them do about this, that they too could share in this blessing. In Jesus' name, amen.